Hi, it's the People Mentor. So today I'm here with Hakeem talking all about empowering leadership strategies for inspiring and guiding your team. Now, Hakeem, you've got so much experience. So introduce yourself and tell us a
Okay,
little bit more.
thank you, Nicola, and thanks for having me on the program. Really appreciate it. So, yeah, my name's Hakeem Adibiyi, and I've been in people management since 1998, where I had my first regional manager's job. My experience is in the healthcare field, actually. So I started as a sales rep in pharmaceuticals. I was a sales rep. I became a regional manager. Then a head of sales, then a sales director, then a commercial director, and then I started managing my own business, which was about going into businesses and helping them structure their business and structure their sales team. So I've been doing that now, as I said, since 1998. So I've worked far and wide, and more latterly, I've been working specifically in how to build international teams, how to build teams that can actually sell in healthcare still, but into export markets and not just into the UK. So that's just a bit about me. So fire away. I'm an
Yeah,
open book.
so that's fascinating because the export business is quite complex. So you've got to be a real expert in there and to understand all the ins and outs of it. And also you've got to really understand the cultures as well,
Yes.
because you can get it so wrong, can't you? Especially when you're selling, if you don't understand the culture. So I think this can be a fascinating session for everybody. So, and I can see me wanting you back again because I'm sure we could do something for a podcast as well. So brilliant, thank you.
No, pleasure.
Um, so as a leader in the medical device industry, how do you balance the need for structure and process with the importance of empowering your team members to take initiative and make decisions?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one because obviously the pharmaceutical and the healthcare market is a very highly regulated one. So you need to make sure that you have some sort of framework. So I believe that structure and process are the backbone anyway of any successful organization. But having said that, empowerment is equally crucial when you're managing teams and you're leading teams, in my opinion. So it's about getting that balance right. So what I've always done actually, and I don't know if this comes from just being in the pharmaceutical market, is that you establish a clear framework. So you make sure that people know what the framework is and the guidelines that you want to provide those for as a foundation for people to work in. But while you've got those guidelines, you then want to encourage, and I always encourage my team members then to take initiative within those boundaries. And I think someone once said to me, said, "Yeah, this is what you can, this is where you can play, but within that you can do pretty much what you like." So you set the boundaries, but then you leave them to take their own initiative, and then then leads you to ensure that you recruit the right sort of people, because you need to make sure you get people who are interdependent as well as independent. So I always try to emphasize the importance of understanding the why behind what our processes are, because then I think you get people who are bought in to what you're trying to do, and they're much more likely to make informed decisions and find it easy to innovate within a framework. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of does it make the boat go faster?
No.
So okay, so it's I think it's now actually it's a company which is actually called now Does It Make the Boat Go Faster? And it was a collection of the Olympians, I think the Olympic boat team from 1998. When
Yeah.
they were basically practicing for the 2000s. So they started looking at, well, how do we make sure that we can win the 2000 Olympics? And what they did was, does it make the boat go faster? So that was almost like their
Yeah.
mantra. Their vision was, we want to make sure we achieve Olympic gold, which they did do. And then their mantra was, does it make the boat go faster? So I introduced that a lot of the time into businesses I'm in. So you give people, right, what is it we're trying to achieve? These are the frameworks, this is the guidelines. And then in terms of what you have to do on a daily basis and how you have the independence is, does it make the boat go faster? So rather than you always saying to me, oh, Hakeem, can I do this? Hakeem, what's the option here? I say, well, no, you need to ask yourself, because you now know what our vision is. You now know what the overarching objective is. So what I want you to always be asking is, does what you're going to do, does the decision you're going to take make the boat go faster? Because the way they did it, what they said was, yeah, well, going to the pub on a Friday night doesn't make the boat go faster, so we didn't do it. But getting up on a cold, wet Sunday morning at 6 o'clock to train, that did make the boat go faster, so we had to do it. And it just almost makes you autonomous, because you understand what the vision is, you understand what the why is, and therefore you can then work on your own accord with the team to make those decisions without having me always, oh, well, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, I want you to do this. Because you've set the vision, you've set the guidance, and then you leave them to work within that guidance. I hope that answers the question.
No, that makes total sense. And actually, I think from when I've worked with small employers, what I've clearly seen is that they want employees who take the initiative, and they struggle with this concept of how do they get them to that stage. So I think you've explained it really nicely. And I think it is about setting those boundaries, managing those expectations, and then giving people that, that ability to go off and do things. And I always used to say, you reminded me so much of that. Yeah, this is what we're working within, but no surprises. If there's something going wrong, come and tell me. That's fine, we can sort it. But if you don't tell me and I can't sort it, and then it goes wham bam, I'm not going to be happy.
Yeah.
Because you've not told me, you've not warned me. So yeah, I think it's all that together with what you've said, and I like the idea of the boat bit. That sums it up nicely about going faster, because that's where you want to be heading. So that's a really good one for people to think about in their workplace. So what do you think the key characteristics of an empowering leader are, and how do those traits actually contribute to team success?
I think there's a lot of talk about authenticity. We'll probably talk about that a bit later. But I think for me, there's probably three key things in terms of leadership and empowering leadership. I think the first one is trust, which links in with the authenticity piece.
Yeah.
I don't think you can get trust if you're not being authentic. Then I think humility, which isn't always easy for leaders, because lots of leaders believe that, oh no, I've got to be out there and I've got to always be right, and so I'll talk about that. And then I think then the last one is effective communication, because it's all, you can have the trust, you can have the humility, but if you can't effectively communicate your message, you can't effectively listen to people, you can't effectively change direction, then you're going to have, I think, difficulty as a leader. So if I just take each of those, so I talk about the trusting, I think trusting team members, we just talked about it before, you want them to be able to take ownership of their tasks, because that shows confidence, as in it shows that you as a leader have confidence in their abilities, and it encourages accountability. And I think that leads to more empowerment. And it is always, especially when you've worked with somebody who hasn't had particularly an empowering leader before, it takes you a bit of time for them to realize, oh, I'm not going to get in trouble if I do something that's not exactly the way Hakeem wanted it, for example. And I think so you have to give that trust to give them the confidence, and then make sure that if they do something that is wrong, that actually the way you deal with it is by communicating, having a conversation, rather than saying, why have you done that? Because if you've told somebody, yeah, you've got this boundary to work in, but within there, I want you to make decisions, and then they do something you don't like, and then you're all over them like a ton of bricks. There's no quicker way to lose your trust and lose their trust, and then you have a problem. So I think trust is number one. Humility, and I think that, as I said, that involves acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and being open to ideas from your team. And I think it was about 10, 15 years ago that I worked with a really great operations director, and he said, and I've stolen it now, I use it all the time. He said, I'm completely agnostic about where the ideas come from. I just want to get to the best solution. And I think that, to me, sums up humility in a leader very well, as in lots of leaders believe that they should always have the ideas. That's not their job. One person could not have all the ideas.
No, not at all.
So yeah, for me, that shows a level of humility that actually it doesn't matter whatever level on the organogram you are, the ideas can come from anywhere, and you should embrace them. And then that part of that humility as well, because there are lots of leaders who will embrace those and then steal the ideas and pretend they're theirs. The part of the humility is embracing the ideas and then making sure that you give acknowledgement for where that idea came from.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the second thing. And then effective communication. You want to make sure that firstly people understand what your vision is, the why, as we were talking about, that everyone's aligned with that, and aligned with the goals of the organization. And, that can only occur through effective communication in terms of outlining what the vision is, having regular meetings with those people to see how they're doing. If they're doing well, making sure that they're aware, that people are aware of it, they're aware of it, and they acknowledge for it. If they're not doing well, then looking at how you can improve that. I think the communication piece, because I remember working in an organization, and we were talking about visions and values. And I think we're trying to do, we're trying to get investors in people or something. and I just said, well, we haven't really got a vision. And the CEO at the time said, we have got a vision. It's just you don't know about it. And I haven't shared it yet. And I was like, right, well, that's probably a bit of a problem if you've got a vision as the leader and you haven't shared it. So I think, effective communication. So trust, humility, and effective communication, I think, are the key characteristics I think you need for an empowering leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you. And interestingly, I've just done a presentation ready for a session tomorrow, and effective leadership can contribute up to 65% to business performance. So if we get it right, all of that is really going to make a difference to that business performance. So, and I know from the Chartered Management Institute that effective management and leadership, if you give people the training, you will, to get them into that stage with all of those three bits, you will get them to increase business performance by, I think their measurements, 22%, and actual individual performance is 32%. So it's going to make a big difference to any business if you get it right.
No, it does. And I think it's trying to understand what effective leadership is, I think, because I think in the past, and I've still seen it in some business today, people think that effective leadership is, borderline bullying behavior, shouting at people, jumping up and down. I remember a guy, another CEO of mine, saying to me, Hakeem, you're too calm, you're too even, and I said, what do you mean? Because the salespeople I know, they run through the office. I said, I don't see the necessity to be shouting and screaming. I said, because that's not how I behave. I said, why would I behave in work differently than I behave at home? I said, it's all about interacting with people. And yes, if there's a reason for me to get angry, and there's a reason for me to get angry, I'll get angry, but it'll be in an appropriate manner. I'm not a shouter, I'm not a screamer, and I've never needed to do that to get my point across. And I've always delivered, exponential growth in the businesses I've worked in. So I said, just trust me. I think I know what I'm doing. And and at the end of it, after I worked with him for about 2 years, he came back to me and said, oh, actually, you're very different than all the people I've worked with, but it's very effective, isn't it? But I think there's still that prevailing view, especially in sales, actually, and marketing to an extent, that you have to be a desk thumper to actually get people to do stuff. And I just don't really think it works. And I think
it doesn't work. Definitely doesn't work. No. And I think you're right. And I think there is ways of showing anger, and even it can be just the look on your face sometimes, and they'll know that they've gone that little bit too far, and it works. But you don't have to be rude. You don't have to shout. And also, at the end of the day, 99% of people do things, and they don't do it deliberately. They do it because something's happened, and you need to understand that. And so as you've gone back, the effective communication, it goes back to that again, isn't it? And having those discussions.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think that what I've learned over time, as exactly as you just articulated, is that there's very few people, there are some, but there's very few people who are doing things just because they want to irritate you, or just because they want to do a bad job. Virtually, as you said, 99% of people in any job want to do a good job.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
they want you to find them doing things right, and make sure you call it out. And then when they're not doing something that well, they want you to help them. And I think if you start from that standpoint in every single instance, I found that generally that you tend to be able to overcome any obstacles that are in your way or in your team's way. And for me, the people who are the table thumpers and that, generally, you look at the stats, you'll have lots of high turnover. They may well perform, but they'll have lots of high turnover. And my view from a just a pure business point of view, number one, high turnover costs you money. High turnover costs you time, and high turnover means that your growth is never as sustainable and as large as it would be if you had a good team around you who are all working in the same direction for the same vision and they enjoy coming to work. You're always going to get better performance out of that team. So for me, turning somebody around who may not be performing that well is much better time invested than smacking my fist on the table, getting angry with them, they leave, and I have to recruit somebody else. It just doesn't make business sense to me.
It doesn't to me, because I mean, if you think about it, and I think the statistics is something like 9 months of a salary is what it costs to replace that person, and that doesn't take into account all that time, as you've said. And then also, every time that you're doing this quick churn, you're never building up that experience, that knowledge. You're losing all that knowledge bank, aren't you? So, absolute, concentrate on the people and help them improve.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So your sales acceleration formula emphasizes targeting the right accounts, understanding decision-making processes, and building clear plans. So how do you get your team members to feel empowered within this structured framework?
I think, yeah, it goes back to the same thing again. It's about clear communication, I think. So my framework, the Sales Accelerator framework, is called, it's actually called, I can't remember if it's a mnemonic or an acronym. Anyway, I think it's a mnemonic, is ADAPT. So and ADAPT stands for, understanding your accounts, the A, then decision-making units, then what keeps you awake at night in terms of identifying what the challenges are. Then once you understand what the challenges are for that your customer, then you present the right data and the right information to them, and then you tackle the objections. So I think where I've always found it very useful is, number one, I always explain anything I'm expecting people to do. I make sure I explain to them why I'm asking you to do it, what's the evidence that it's going to work, and then how you can then implement it. And I always give people tools. I'm a bit of a process obsessive, to be honest. So the sales acceleration for me came out of me just, really modeling what I'd done and what I'd seen other people do that was successful, and then putting into a process. So I always explain to people, this is why I'm asking you to do it. This is the evidence that it's successful. And then I always give lots of different examples of how it benefits. And then I'll start to workshop with them, because I think the key thing is, it doesn't matter how much the vision people are bought into. People work for a lot of things. One is obviously the vision, but they also work for themselves. So you then want to make sure that they understand, well, what's the benefit to me? What's the benefit to everyone in the team individually, as well as the team as a whole, to taking this on board? So when I can demonstrate to them, look, you're going to shorten your sales cycle, so you're going to speak to less people, you're going to have more meaningful conversations, you're going to enjoy the job more, your presentations will be more impactful, then automatically people start thinking, oh, well, I'm interested in that. As opposed to, I just want to talk to you about the ADAPT methodology that I've invented. That doesn't really make people get people excited. But when you're talking to them about what's the benefit of you taking upon a different strategy that other people might not be using, I think that really helps. And then it's about making sure that they are given the right training and the right resources and the right support. So it's not just, right, this is what I want you to do, off you go and do it. Making sure you've given them the real benefit of your experience and your resources and any help that you can give them. So I think that generally gets people to buy into it and really understand what they're trying to achieve.
No, absolutely. And I see a lot of this at the moment with micro business owners, where they don't understand that they need, when they're changing something, they need to share that benefit of why it's important for the client or why it's important for whoever their stakeholders are, and they just don't do it, and then they wonder why it falls flat on the face and why it's not successful. And I think we're lucky because we've worked in organizations, and you learn it very quick if you want change to stick and go through and be successful. And because micro business owners a lot of the time, and of course I am generalizing here because there will be those who do get it right, but a lot of them haven't had that kind of training around making sure that you're communicating clearly the benefits to the people involved. And I just think, yeah, I just want to grab them and help them with that whenever I see them do it. I was like, no, please. So yeah, and I am going a bit off from management leadership in organisations, but yeah, it just oh, I just want to help. Can you share an example of when empowering your team members led to a significant breakthrough or success in your organisation?
Certainly. I mean, quite a few. Let me think of. Okay, yeah. So there was a time when we were facing some significant challenges in penetrating a new market in Mexico. We had a capital device and some consumables. And what I did is what I generally always do. I got a cross-functional team together. They knew what the outcome we were trying to get into. So the situation was that in Mexico, the way that let me reverse it. So in the UK and other markets, they'll buy the capital equipment and then they'll buy the consumables separately, and you really make most of the money out of the consumables because that's feeding the capital equipment. Now in Mexico, however, they get the capital equipment for free and then they pay for the consumables, but our consumables are not very expensive. So you'd have to buy quite a lot of consumables over quite a long period of time to be able to pay for that. So we were basically saying, I mean, we were just having a cross-functional team. We were brainstorming, trying to look at what could be done. And I left after we'd had that meeting, I left it to my team member. I was basically like a sounding board, to say, right, we've got strategy. Obviously, the way that we are trying to deliver is not going to work in Mexico. What can we do to actually change the paradigm, do something different? So what he went to do after we'd had that meeting is he went back, spoke to the distributor in Mexico, and just started trying to get underneath the real crux of what it was. And what we found out actually was that the product was a disposable, it's a consumable, and it went into the drains. Now ours was completely flushable. The alternative wasn't flushable. So what we then found out as he was doing the investigation was the hospitals were generally going for the cheap, obviously going for the people who were given the free capital equipment and the cheap non-flushable consumables, but that's then blocking the drains. So they were spending hundreds of thousands of pounds every year to unblock the drains. So what my team did was speak to the distributor and say, well, is there anything we can do to sort of like work together to manage this? So the solution that came out with, to cut a long story short, was to say, right, actually, well, we will guarantee that if you use our product, you buy everything together. So you buy a one price solution. So you get the machine, which obviously we incorporate in the price. You get the consumables, but we will also do your drain cleaning because we knew that you wouldn't need drain cleaning if you're using our products. So we can then put a higher price in for our products because the hospital is no longer going to be paying hundreds of thousands of pounds to clean the drains. So that's what we suggested. That's what we discussed with the distributor. We put some pricing models around it, went to the hospital snapped our hand off, and the sales in Mexico went through the roof. And the interesting thing there was, when we started having the conversation with Mexico, we were almost like, maybe Mexico isn't a market we can break into, because if they don't want to buy the machine, it doesn't fit our business model. So I think the fact that we had a team meeting and I let the guy who was working Mexico lead it rather than me. So I was just basically like a facilitator of that meeting so that we could come out with solutions. And then we came out with a really powerful solution. And I think and possibly when I was younger and less experienced, I probably would have led the meeting and I'd have been trying to come out with all the solutions. And I didn't know Mexico as well as he did. So it'd have been very hard for me to come out with those solutions that he came out with because he understood it. So what I always try to do, and I think the moral of the story is, always defer to the expert. You can facilitate meetings, you can facilitate solutions, but if you've got an expert in a particular area, utilize that expert and let them lead to get to the solution rather than saying, well, I'm your boss, so I'm going to lead, because I don't think I'd have come out of that solution.
No, I often think as a leader, your role is to facilitate and let everybody come together to come out with what the right answer is. And that often you may feel like you're not giving the ideas, but at the end of the day, you're encouraging and inspiring others to come up with what's the right solution. So that's a brilliant example.
Oh, thank you.
You know,
Good, excellent. I hope it's helpful.
yeah, it is. So how do you build a culture of trust and psychological safety within your team? Because obviously that's essential for empowering leadership. So how do you go about it?
I think what I always start with trying to lead by example, because I think if you're building any sort of culture and you do not extol the virtue of that culture, then I think that culture you're trying to build is destined to failure. So the first thing I try to do is lead by example. The second thing I try to do is reward people for the culture and the values that I'm trying to instill. Because what I think people say culture is, if you try to define it, is how things get done around here. Really, so you can cite any culture you want. People will look at the way you do things, and that's what the culture is. I think Enron, I think they had like a massive plaque in the middle of their now defunct building, and I think one of their values was trustworthiness. Well, I think we all know that they weren't particularly trustworthy, or they certainly weren't living that value. So I think that to me is the first two things. You lead by example and you reward people for those. And I think I try and make a point when I'm in any business is by being transparent, which is honesty, and having some integrity about things, and being honest to people. Being approachable, so that people don't think, oh well, because he's there, because that's what people think when they look at an organogram. Oh, he's the CEO or he's the chief commercial officer or whatever. I can't speak to him. So I make it a point, as one of my friends who used to be my boss said, when you're trying to build trust, there's a thing that's called, especially if you're in an office, management by walking about. So that you get out of your office, you go and speak to people, you show an interest in what they're doing, rather than sitting in an office and waiting for people to knock on your door, because it's unlikely that people are going to do it. So I think that being approachable and then being supportive, and encouraging open communication. And when I say open communication, I mean I do mean genuinely two-way communication, because leaders are very good at talking, and I'm great at talking. I love it, but we need to be equally as good at listening. And Oscar Trimboli, who I interviewed once, said it's not active listening is great, because active listening is you're listening to what's being said, but deep listening is about listening to what's not being said and actually reading those signs and understanding that. So I think that to me is what communication is about. It's talking and responding, but it's about active and deep listening. Because once you do that, people know that you're actually genuinely interested. I did a couple of experiments when I was at university, actually, because us Brits, we love to say, "Oh, how are you doing?" But no one's really interested in what you say. So the amount of time, so I used to say, "Oh yeah, fine," and then I went about 3 or 4 months where I just kept saying, not really that well, actually. And everyone went, "Oh, great," and they'd walk off. I think, oh, that's interesting. So you're asking me how I'm doing, but you don't really care how I'm doing. It's just like something that comes out of your mouth. So I learned then that actually you need to make sure that when somebody gives you an answer, you respond appropriately and you try and understand. So if someone does say to me, "Oh, I'm not that great," then actually I'm interested. I want to know, what's happened. You're normally such a bubbly character, and there's loads of signs that you can pick up, which will give you an indication if someone's really happy or someone's not that happy, and you should show an interest in that.
You totally should. And you actually reminded me of two things. The first one was after I'd had a major operation, a few weeks later, I'm really struggling still, walking down the road, trying to get some steps in to try and get better. And I bumped into my neighbour, and she said, "Hello, how are you?" And I went, "Oh, I'm not really very good, really deflated, really struggling." And she went, "Oh, right, okay, good for you, bye." It's just like, what?
Yeah. Why ask?
Yeah, exactly. Why ask? Don't bother. Just don't bother. And then I'm thinking about what else you said about sitting and really listening, and deep. I love that, deep listening. And we used to have a director who would come and sit on the floor very quietly, just sit there, and you'd forget he was there, and he'd really pick up what was going on. And you could guarantee he would run a management session a few weeks later for across the departments, and he'd have been around all the offices, and he'd have come up with some changes that were needed, that were as a result of listening. And I can remember him putting in a manager's charter because of what he'd heard in the meetings. And it was, and just being on that floor. So absolutely, what you've wrote, it really works. It really does.
No, it does. And I think that it's, in terms of that, giving people the feeling of safety that they are working in an open environment and they can say what they want to do. I think it's trying to reward those behaviors as well, which I always try and do. So whether that's an employee of the year, or you just see someone doing a value or extolling a value that you'd like and giving them a spot reward for it, or you do an employee of the week, and then making sure that when they do something well, you call it out and people know that actually this is something that's valued. And again, when you're promoting people, you make sure that people know why they're being promoted. It's because, yes, they performed, but they performed in the right way. Because there's so many people that, or there's lots of business I see where they say the culture is honesty, integrity, it's open communication. And the people who are at the top of the organization don't show any of those skills at all. They've just delivered good sales or good results. So you're basically saying to the rest of the team, actually, this isn't really what is rewarded in this organization. So I think that's really important, I think, in terms of demonstrating and rewarding and making sure that people understand. And then if mistakes happen, then you make sure that you focus on the learning and the growth that you can get from there rather than blame, because I think there's nothing that destroys psychological safety, a positive culture, more than the blame game where it's like fingers are pointed all over the place apart from it yourself. And I always try, when if something goes wrong, I try to look at it from a 360-degree point of view, because if I'm the leader and something's gone wrong, then you can't absolve yourself, because you've employed the people, you've worked with the people, you support the people. So I'm always looking firstly right, so could it have been something I could do better? If there's something that I could have changed? And I think the way, when you then look at the learnings and the growth are not just about the individual who's perceived to have made a mistake. It's a collective discussion from my point of view to say, all right, so what could we as a business, as a team, as individuals have done better to have prevented this from happening?
Yeah, you're right. I totally agree with everything you said about trust and psychological safety. Absolutely. And there's some really great hints, tips, whatever you want to call them. They're really useful there. So yeah, thank you. Okay. Right, Hakeem. So your book and your podcast, and I've been on your podcast and I absolutely love your formatting of your podcast, discusses the importance of establishing sales and marketing as a respected discipline. So how does this mindset contribute to empowering your team members and driving success?
I think that I'll just take you back a bit slightly in terms of how I came to the book and then the podcast, which then shows how it helps empower the team. So what I found in many of the boardrooms I'd sat around was that every discipline seemed to have people to respect it. So you'd sit around the table, the HR director would speak, everyone listens, nods attentively, then the technical person, then maybe the accountant or the FD. And then when I, as the commercial person, started to speak, everyone started to jump in. And they seemed to think that they had opinions which were as valid as mine. I'm not saying that they didn't have anything to add, but obviously I've been doing it for quite some time and I built a methodology. And I noticed that people jumped in on my session but didn't jump in the same way in other sessions. And what I started to realize was that the reason why those other disciplines were respected is because they had clear methodologies that people could see that they were working through, and therefore people respected the fact that if I follow that methodology, it leads to a result, it leads to a sustainable result, and therefore I'm going to listen to that person who's an expert in that area. The same wasn't true of sales or commercial, and I think that comes from the fact that people in those positions were not portraying what they were delivering as a strategic part of the overall vision of the business. So that's why I went around or went about trying to produce a sales acceleration formula, so that I actually had a very discernible process which I could evidence, and therefore when I'm in those rooms I could then explain exactly what I was doing and why I was doing it, and that then led to more people respecting exactly what our team and our area, our discipline was doing. And the benefit of that for the team was, number one, once the board starts to respect what you're doing, they're much more interested in what you're doing, rather than thinking, oh, the salespeople, anyone could do that job, they're expendable. They actually started to understand what the methodology was we were working with. That then led to obviously more influence in those environments for the commercial team, which then meant that actually the board started being very interested in what the salespeople were actually doing and what they were achieving. And that then led to actually people seeing them as experts in their areas, so that in the board meetings, you now started to get the board asking, oh, can such and such from your team come and explain that? Can such and such from your team come and discuss this? Which immediately elevates the pride, the pride, the positivity, the attitude of the people in my team, because they're thinking, oh, right, all of a sudden, we're now being seen as an integral part of the team, and I've never been invited to a board meeting before. And a perfect example of that was in one of the companies I was working with, and we were trying to expand their European division and then their global division. Then when I started working with them, they had two people, key account managers, who'd been there, I think, about 15 years or so, and they'd always just had two people in that division. Once I started putting the process in place, then it was easy for me to go to the board and say, right, well, this is the process. You've seen what's been achieved. We need to get another person. And then that process replicated itself over 18 months. So we went from two people to, I think, about seven over a period of 18 months, based on the fact that they'd seen a process. They trusted the process that I was discussing with them. They'd spoken to the salespeople and the marketing people in the team and the commercial people. So all of a sudden, the commercial team was elevated in the mind of the business, which obviously elevates those individuals in the mind of the business, and that business or those individuals then felt more empowered, because they felt they didn't just have my endorsement, but they now had the endorsement of the company, and the company understood that actually when we say this is the framework, because I explained the framework to them, but my guys and girls will work within that framework, but these are the results you deliver, then that leads to an empowerment. And then in terms of the podcast, I've just tried to, what I started to see was, actually, it's not just that commercial area, but there's lots of other things that people did that got a process. So I decided to build a podcast so I can bring people on from all different areas to talk about their process and talk about how you can move forward in a business. And I think that when you're leading a business and people can see that you are always looking for the best solution and you're following a process, that then leads to people in your team feeling empowered to actually deliver within a framework.
Yeah, it does. And it also, as you know, my thoughts go, is that it also gives you the evidence, because you've got the processes sitting behind it. So that works really well. So yeah, that's a really good point. I've actually seen that with management in the large corporate that I was in, that management wasn't considered worth listening to when I first started. And I was very lucky to work with a senior lead who didn't think like that, and who was about making it as a profession within the department, and did a lot of work around that. And you started to see things change, and it become more respected. And every single component, every single role is part of a profession and needs to be acknowledged as such, doesn't it? But it's making sure you've got those processes in place and the evidence to support it as well.
No, 100%, 100%.
Yeah. So how do you ensure your team members feel valued, recognised and appreciated for their contributions? And you've talked about recognition earlier in this video, but I think that's really important to go back to, because I think that's a really important component of leading.
No, I agree. And I think so. The reward and recognition piece is critical, because there's no point saying that you believe in these values, that you've got a culture of trust, if you are not then demonstrating that through, firstly, your own behaviors, but secondly, by rewarding and recognizing the attributes that you want people to follow. So, the example I often use is you look at Enron, and Enron had, I think, had a plaque in the middle of their foyer, and it had their values, and one of those values was trustworthiness. Well, we all know what happened to Enron. So, people say culture is, the way things get done around here. And therefore, you need to ensure that, number one, you are leading by example and you're showing those attributes. And then number two, that you're rewarding and recognizing the attributes that that you want that culture to be. Because what happens is you go into lots of organizations, they have a culture of X, Y, and Z. But when you look at the people who have been promoted or people at the top of that organization, they don't have those values. So therefore, I think it's really important to make sure that actually all of your team members feel valued for the contributions they make, and they're rewarded for those contributions. So, you're always trying to catch people doing things right rather than looking for things that are wrong, and then rewarding and recognizing. And as I mentioned it before, I do employee of the year, employment of the month, employee of the quarter, and then you do spot prizes on, things which are the values that that you recognize. And then also, when you're promoting people, you want to make sure that you're promoting them not just for the performance, i.e. what's been done, but you're promoting them on how it's been done. And you're making sure that that's not just part of promotion, but it's part of your regular one-to-ones, it's part of your PDPs and all those things. So it becomes embedded in the culture that your culture and your behaviors are just as important to us as a business as are the outcomes that you're getting from those. And I think that's how I've always tried to do it. And then, as I said, I think trying to be what I am saying that I want other people to be. So being trustworthy, being transparent, being approachable, being supportive, so that when mistakes happen, we're focusing on learning and growing rather than blame. Because the quickest way to destroy culture is by having, people pointing fingers at other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so as a final takeaway, what advice would you give to other leaders looking to adopt a more empowering leadership style and inspire their teams to achieve greater success?
I think, so creating a clear vision and communicating effectively, ensuring that everyone understands their roles in achieving that vision, and encouraging, that open communication and being approachable. And also providing the team with the tools and the resources, because it's great to have the communication, it's great to have a discussion about what you want people to do, but you then need to empower them and help them to be able to achieve it, I think. And then the other two things I'd say is, I mentioned in the last answer, is having trust or leading by trust and building trust by being authentic, because you have to, if you're not yourself, then people aren't going to trust you, because sooner or later your words are not going to be congruent with your actions. So I think that trust piece, and leading with empathy. We talked about it before. People want to know that not just their leaders, but everyone they work with is interested in them and what they do. So I think having that empathy and making sure that you have trust, you have empathy, and that you communicate and you have a clear vision.
Yeah, couldn't disagree. It's all key. So that's brilliant. Do you just want to finish off with where people can connect with you to find out more, so that they know, including your podcast?
So LinkedIn is where you'll find me posting and interacting mainly. So you can find me on LinkedIn. My podcast is the Hands-On Business Podcast, and you can find it on Spotify, YouTube, and where else? Every place, Apple, and every other major platform. And then in terms of my Healthcare Export Accelerator, which is the online course I'm just about to launch in the next few months, then it's the Healthcare Export Accelerator.com. and you'll find them there.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you for your time today, and really appreciate it. And we'll be putting all the links in the description underneath and in the post so that people can get hold of you. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.